Noah had barely regained the strength to stand when fate pushed him into another unexpected turn, one that would forever reshape his journey through the merciless jungle. As he limped forward through the thick, tangled vegetation, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves, he suddenly heard faint voices, human voices, echoing from somewhere ahead, voices trembling, desperate, and strangely familiar. Forcing his weak legs to move faster, he pushed through a curtain of vines and stepped into a small clearing where he froze in shock, for people, all covered in mud, blood, and scratches, were huddled together, barely conscious, trembling from exhaustion, 2 men and 2 women, their clothes torn, faces pale, eyes filled with fear and hopelessness. They gasped when they saw him, as if they couldn't believe another human was still alive in this monstrous jungle. Noah stumbled closer, whispering, "Are you survivors?" And one of the men nodded weakly, explaining between heavy breaths that they had been passengers on the same aircraft search team that had earlier flown over Noah. Their plane had been struck by a violent wind current, lost control, and crash-landed somewhere deeper in the forest, killing some and injuring the rest. These 4 had crawled out of the wreckage and wandered for days, without food, without guidance, with nothing but the will to keep moving. Hearing this, Noah felt a sudden wave of relief wash over him, not because he was safe, but because he finally wasn't alone. The group, now 5 in total, sat together, exchanging hurried introductions, sharing small fragments of hope, and silently acknowledging the brutal reality surrounding them. They were all starving, dehydrated, and mentally shattered. As night approached, the jungle grew colder, darker, and louder, with strange roars echoing from unseen corners. Noah knew they couldn't survive without food, so he gathered whatever strength he had left and encouraged everyone to move. They needed to hunt, quickly, before night turned deadly. Using sticks sharpened into primitive spears and rocks shaped like crude weapons, they moved slowly through the undergrowth, their breath shaky, their eyes scanning every shadow. Suddenly, a rustle, a small ball-like creature emerged, snarling, its eyes glowing in the shadows. Instinct kicked in. The survivors circled the creature, and working together, they managed to trap it between 2 fallen logs. Noah struck first, his spear shaking in his hands, and the others followed, until the creature finally collapsed. The victory felt unreal, messy, desperate, but necessary. They dragged the animal back to the clearing, where Noah created a fire by rubbing stones together, the sparks catching dry leaves until flames rose into the darkness. For the first time in days, the scent of cooked meat filled the air, warm and comforting. They ate slowly, painfully, their hands trembling but their eyes shining with renewed life. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on their tired faces, and for a moment, it felt like hope had returned. Yet Noah knew this was only the beginning. 5 wounded, exhausted humans trying to survive in a jungle filled with ancient dangers, hybrid beasts, poisonous plants, and an environment that showed no mercy. As they rested and the fire warmed their bones, he looked around at the group and silently made a promise to himself: no matter how hard this jungle fought to break them, he would not let these people die. Together, they would survive. Together, they would push through the impossible. Together, they would walk until they found a way out. And with that promise burning in his heart, Noah prepared for the long night ahead, the first of many nights where survival would be earned, not given. The night grew heavier around them as Noah and the others continued their slow, painful journey through the forest, the darkness pressing in like a living thing, cold and merciless, and every breath they took felt as if it carried the weight of 1,000 unseen dangers. Their bodies ached, scratches burning, muscles trembling, clothes dirty and torn from days of crawling through mud and bushes, and their minds were exhausted, stretched thin from hunger, fear, and the constant expectation that something might jump at them from the shadows. After walking for what felt like hours, they finally stopped near a cluster of dense trees where the leaves were dry enough to gather for a small fire. The 4 survivors they had met earlier, Adil, Myra, Haider, and Sana, were still weak, barely able to stand at times, but they tried their best to help collect wood, though their movements were slow and shaky. Noah watched them closely, quietly amazed at how they were still pushing forward despite being half broken. When the fire finally lit, crackling and glowing like a tiny sun in the endless night, everyone sat around it with a mixture of relief and sadness, the warmth touching their frozen skin and almost bringing tears to their eyes. This was the first real heat they had felt in days, and for a moment, just a moment, it made them feel human again. Their stomachs growled painfully, loud enough to echo in the silence, reminding them that survival was not just about avoiding danger but also about fighting the emptiness inside. Earlier, they had caught 2 small forest animals using a makeshift spear Noah had crafted from a branch and a shard of broken metal he found stuck in a tree trunk. It had taken them hours of crawling, waiting, missing, throwing, losing balance, and trying again, but eventually, hunger gave them enough strength to succeed. Now, as the animals roasted slowly over the fire, the smell drifted through the air, pulling everyone closer, their eyes fixed on the sizzling meat like it was the most precious treasure in the world. Myra, her voice weak, whispered that she had never imagined she'd be grateful for simply smelling food, and Sana nodded silently, her eyes shining with tears. They all shared the same feeling. Their lives before this crash suddenly felt like a dream, a distant memory of comfort, cleanliness, and endless choices they never appreciated. Noah kept turning the meat, careful not to burn it, knowing they could not afford to waste even a single bite. The firelight flickered across their faces, revealing exhaustion mixed with a strange, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they were getting stronger, becoming fighters without even realizing it. When the food was finally ready, they divided it equally, making sure everyone got a fair share. The first bite felt unreal, warm, soft, flavorful in a way that only starvation could make possible. Adil actually laughed, a dry, tired laugh, as tears rolled down his cheeks because the simple act of eating felt like a miracle. After finishing their food, the exhaustion hit them like a wave. The forest around them grew colder, the night sounds louder, and the distant howl of some unknown animal made them all freeze for a moment, instinctively moving closer to the fire. Noah suggested they take turns staying awake to keep the fire alive and watch for danger. No one disagreed. They all knew the forest was unpredictable, and one mistake could cost them everything. Myra and Haida took the first watch while the others tried to rest, though sleep came slowly and reluctantly. Lying on the hard ground, wrapped in nothing but their dirty clothes and whatever leaves they could gather, they listened to the crackling fire, the rustling leaves, the occasional snapping of branches far away, and the soft breathing of their companions. The night felt endless, stretching into eternity, but the fire in the center kept them anchored, reminding them that as long as they stayed together, they still had a chance. Noah stayed awake longer than he was supposed to, unable to relax, his heart heavy with responsibility for the strangers who trusted him, for the friends who followed him, and for himself, a man caught between fear and determination. He thought about his family far away, wondering if they believed he was dead or if they still hoped he was alive somewhere, fighting to return. The thought pushed him forward, strengthening the quiet promise he had made to himself: he would not die in this forest. He would get everyone out. Hours passed slowly as the fire dimmed, then brightened again when new wood was added. At one point, a sound, a sharp crack from somewhere behind the bushes, made everyone jump to their feet, hearts pounding, eyes searching in the darkness. But nothing appeared. Maybe it was just an animal passing by, or maybe their minds were playing tricks on them, sharpened by fear. Eventually, the night calmed again, and the group sat back down, huddled close. Noah looked around at their tired faces, the firelight reflecting in their eyes like tiny sparks of unbroken will. Despite everything, the hunger, the fear, the injuries, the cold, they were still here, still breathing, still fighting. And in that moment, Noah understood something powerful: survival was not just about strength or luck. It was about staying together, trusting one another, and refusing to give up even when the world tried to break them. As the night stretched on, the fire crackled softly, guarding them like a loyal companion, and for the first time in a long time, Noah felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The morning came with a pale, tired light that filtered weakly through the canopy, painting everything in shades of grey and gold as Noah and the others slowly opened their eyes, muscles stiff, bodies aching, but still grateful that they had survived another night in the unforgiving forest. Yet the relief did not last long, because the cold air immediately reminded them that survival was never guaranteed and the day ahead would only become harder. Their clothes were still damp from yesterday's rain, their throats dry, and the taste of last night's meal had already faded, replaced by the familiar emptiness clawing again inside their stomachs. The 4 new survivors, Adil, Myra, Hyder, and Sana, appeared weaker today, their injuries more visible in the daylight, bruises darkening on their arms, swollen cuts on their legs, dried blood around Myra's forehead where she had hit metal during the aircraft break. Noah checked each of them carefully, his expression serious but gentle, and though they were exhausted, they forced small smiles because they were still alive, and sometimes that was enough. After burying the animal bones so no predator would track them, they prepared to move again, following a narrow path between the trees that Myra claimed she had seen before fainting the day they crashed. It wasn't much of a lead, but hope meant everything here. They walked slowly, helping one another over fallen logs, sharp rocks, and slippery patches of moss that made their legs tremble. With each step, the forest seemed to grow wilder, denser, louder, birds screeching above them, insects buzzing like static in the air, the distant rumble of something large moving through the undergrowth, though Noah hoped it was just an illusion created by fear. Sana stumbled halfway over a branch, nearly collapsing, but Noah caught her just in time, steadying her with a reassuring hand, and she whispered a shaky thank you, tears forming in her tired eyes because the strength she once had now felt like a distant memory. The group stopped for a brief rest near a stream that sparkled under the sunlight like shattered glass. The water was cold and fresh, and drinking it felt like awakening their souls. They cleaned their wounds as best as they could, hissing from the sting but grateful for the temporary relief. Hyder, who had remained mostly silent since last night, finally spoke, his voice rough, low, and trembling, telling them how he and the others survived the aircraft explosion, clinging to a broken section of metal before it fell into the trees. They had wandered for days with no direction, no food, no fire, barely any hope, until they finally crossed paths with Noah's group, and that meeting felt like a miracle to them. Noah listened carefully, mentally piecing together the crash fragments to understand just how wide the debris field might be, because if there were more survivors scattered somewhere, they needed to find them. After filling their water bottles with leaves shaped into cups, they continued deeper into the forest. The ground turned muddy, sucking at their feet, and the air grew thicker, making it harder to breathe. Occasionally they spotted broken branches, footprints, and torn pieces of aircraft fabric stuck on thorny bushes, silent clues that confirmed more survivors might have passed through this area. This fueled their determination, but it also raised fear. If someone else was alive, where were they now? And were they safe? Hours passed, and the sun rose higher, burning through the humidity until sweat coated their faces and clothes. To conserve energy, they walked in silence, communicating only through gestures. Noah's mind raced constantly, calculating distances, remembering the forest's patterns, watching for signs of danger. They paused when they heard a sudden rustle on their right, everyone freezing, breath shallow, eyes wide. For a moment, the forest felt like it had stopped breathing with them. Then, a wild boar burst between the bushes, running in the opposite direction, its heavy hooves pounding against the ground. It wasn't attacking, but its presence was enough to remind them just how small and vulnerable they were compared to the creatures hiding in this endless green world. Once the danger passed, they resumed walking, now more alert than before. As the afternoon approached, Noah signaled them to stop because he found something, a torn piece of a backpack strap caught on a low branch. When he turned it over, there were faint bloodstains on the fabric. Sana covered her mouth, eyes filling with fear, while Myra whispered that this must be from the girl they had heard screaming the night after their crash. Adil insisted they follow the direction the strap pointed toward, even though the path looked darker, more tangled, almost as if the forest itself was warning them not to enter, but they had no other choice. They walked carefully, pushing branches aside, stepping over roots, pausing whenever the wind carried strange sounds through the trees. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, and the light grew dim despite the afternoon sun above. It felt as though they were entering a different part of the forest, a place less forgiving, more dangerous, untouched by hope. Suddenly, they came across a small clearing where someone had once tried to start a fire, though it had burned out long ago. The ashes were cold, scattered by wind, but the shape was clear. Someone had been here recently. Noah kneeled, touching the dirt, analyzing footprints with narrowed eyes. There were two sets, one small, one larger, but the tracks were uneven, chaotic, as if the people were limping or running while injured. They must have moved on, but where? Before they could discuss anything, a distant scream echoed faintly through the woods, a terrifying, sharp cry full of pain and desperation. Everyone froze again, hearts racing, the sound slicing through their nerves like a blade. Noah stood up immediately, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. The scream came again, faint but unmistakable, pulling them deeper into danger. He looked at everyone, his voice calm but firm. "We're not leaving anyone behind. Let's go." And despite the fear in their eyes, they nodded, because in this forest, humanity was the only strength they had left. They began moving in the direction of the scream with urgency, tightening their breath, each step echoing a mixture of fear and hope as the forest around them grew darker and thicker, branches lowering like claws trying to pull them back, but Noah continued to push forward, fueled by the belief that someone out there needed them desperately enough to cry out despite the dangers. The scream had come from deep within a shadowed part of the forest, a place the sunlight barely touched, and as they followed the faint echo, the air grew colder, carrying a damp, metallic smell that made their nerves twitch. Adil whispered that it might be an animal mimicking human cries, but Noah shook his head. There was human terror inside that sound, the type no creature could imitate. Their pace quickened, though the terrain fought against every step, thick roots twisted beneath their feet, and thorny vines whipped at their arms. Myra stumbled twice but refused to let anyone help her, her determination shining through the pain etched across her exhausted face. Hyder, despite limping from an earlier fall, kept scanning the trees with wide, alert eyes, gripping a long wooden stick they had crafted earlier for protection. Sana moved close to Noah, her breathing shaky, her hands trembling from both hunger and fear. The scream echoed again, closer, sharper, filled with agony that pierced them like ice. They broke into a careful run, dodging branches, slipping on wet leaves, their hearts pounding with the dread of being too late. Suddenly, the forest opened into a small ravine, where a steep drop revealed a narrow pit between jagged rocks. And there, at the bottom, curled against the muddy wall, was a teenage boy, barely 17, covered in scratches, his ankle twisted unnaturally, his clothes torn as if he had crawled through thorns for hours. He looked up at them with eyes full of terror and relief, his voice cracking as he cried, "Please, please don't leave me." Noah knelt at the edge of the ravine, scanning the surroundings for danger before calling out calmly, "We're here. We're not leaving you." The pit wasn't deep, but it was narrow and slippery, with sharp rocks that could easily injure someone trying to climb down. Adil suggested lowering a branch, but the boy was too weak to climb. Myra then spotted a long vine wrapped around a nearby tree, thick enough to work as a rope if they reinforced it with smaller branches. Working together, they carefully tied knots to make handles. Noah tested its strength, pulling hard until the vine creaked but didn't snap. "I'm going down," he said, ignoring the other's worried protests as he wrapped the vine around his arm and slid into the ravine, wincing when jagged stones scraped against his side. When his feet touched the mud at the bottom, the boy stared at him in disbelief, tears spilling down his dirt-covered cheeks. "I thought I was going to die here," the boy whispered, voice trembling from trauma. Noah gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not today." "What's your name?" "Ray-Yan," he answered weakly. "I got separated. I heard the plane engines explode. I just ran." His words faded into sobs. Noah checked his leg, swollen, bruised, possibly fractured. He signaled to the group above, and they slowly lowered the vine, bracing themselves to carry Ray-Yan up. As Noah wrapped the vine under Ray-Yan's arms, the boy winced in pain but held on tightly. "We're lifting!" Myra called from above as the group pulled with all their strength, feet digging into the dirt, arms shaking. Ray-Yan's body slowly rose, inch by inch, until Adil and Haider finally managed to grab him and pull him to safety. Now Noah climbed up, slipping once but catching himself on a jutting rock until he reached the top. The moment he stood safely beside the others, the forest. Air! Adil hurled the sharp rock, hitting the ground near the animal's paw. The wildcat hissed, tail flicking faster, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Noah bent down and lifted a burning branch from the remains of an old fire someone had left earlier, its embers faint but still glowing, and waved it boldly, sparks drifting upward. That was enough. The wildcat stepped back, growling, then finally turned and disappeared into the dense shadows, leaving the group trembling but alive. As silence settled again, everyone exhaled shakily. Sana hugged Ray-Yan gently. Myra wiped a tear from her cheek. Haider dropped his stick, exhausted. Noah allowed himself a moment to breathe, then said, "Let's move. Ray-Yan needs shelter. And we're not safe here anymore." They lifted Ray-Yan carefully, supporting him from both sides, and began walking deeper into the forest, tired, hungry, frightened, but together, stronger than they had been yesterday. By the time they finally reached a small clearing safe enough to rest, darkness had swallowed the forest entirely, leaving only the faint glow of fireflies drifting like tiny floating stars, and Noah knew they could not walk another step in their exhausted, injured state, especially Ray-Yan, who clung weakly to Adil's shoulder while limping heavily on his good foot. Haider and Myra began gathering sticks despite their aching muscles, while Sana knelt beside Ray-Yan, wiping the dirt from his forehead with gentle hands. Noah used the flint he kept from earlier days to spark a fire, tiny sparks flying onto dry leaves until finally, a flame caught and spread into a warm, crackling glow that seemed to push the darkness back. As the fire grew, its light revealed the true condition of their group: ripped clothes, bruised faces, hair matted with dirt, eyes sunken from hunger, bodies trembling from fatigue, yet somehow each one of them still carried a faint glimmer of determination inside. They sat in a circle, closer to one another than they had ever been, huddled not only for warmth but for comfort, because the forest at night was alive with sounds, distant growls, clicking insects, rustling leaves, and they needed to feel like they were not alone in this endless jungle. Noah passed Ray-Yan a small portion of roasted roots Myra had found earlier, and though it was barely enough food for a child, Ray-Yan devoured it gratefully, tears filling his eyes. "I thought I was done," he whispered. "I thought no one would ever find me." Myra placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling softly. "You're with us now. We survived together." With the fire crackling between them, Noah finally spoke, his voice steady but tired. "We all came here by chance. But surviving, that's something we're choosing to do together." For a moment, no one said anything. They simply watched the flames dance and twist as if the fire itself was listening. Then Haider leaned forward, clearing his throat. "I guess I should start," he said, staring into the fire as though the memories were hidden in the orange glow. "I was traveling with my younger brother. he didn't make it when the aircraft went down. I searched for him for hours after the crash. When I realized I was alone, I kept moving. I didn't think I'd ever meet another human again, but then I found Myra, bleeding and unconscious. Myra lowered her gaze, her lips trembling. I woke up thinking I was dead, she murmured. But Hyder forced me to stand. He kept saying we would find others. I didn't believe him until we found Adil and Sana. Adil nodded slowly, rubbing the bandages tied around his arm. We were thrown far away from the crash site, he began. I woke up stuck under a broken piece of metal. Sana pulled me out even though she was hurt worse. Sana gave a small smile, nudging him. You would have done the same. Noah listened quietly, letting their voices fill the night like pieces of a broken puzzle slowly coming together, each story revealing a different wound, a different fear, but the same unbearable loneliness they had carried until they found one another. When the group fell silent again, Rayyan spoke, his voice shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. My parents were supposed to meet me at the airport, he whispered. I kept thinking, if they knew where I was right now, they would tear the sky open to find me. Tears rolled down his face, shining in the firelight. Sana reached over and gently wiped them with her sleeve. They will, she whispered. Someone will find us. But Noah didn't speak. His thoughts drifted to his own story, the one he had kept buried deep inside since the moment he woke up near the crashed aircraft with blood on his face and the screams of dying passengers still echoing in his ears. He had wandered alone for days, surviving attacks, climbing cliffs, escaping rivers, meeting strange creatures, and fighting hunger until he barely recognized the man he had once been. And yet, he hadn't shared any of it, not yet. So he took a deep breath and finally spoke. I was alone for a long time, he said quietly, the fire reflecting in his eyes like molten gold. I thought I'd lose my mind in this forest. I met animals who helped me, creatures that shouldn't even exist, things I can't explain. I fell into pits, I was attacked, I almost drowned, I starved, I bled, but somehow I kept going. Maybe I wasn't meant to survive alone. Maybe I was meant to survive with all of you. The group stared at him, stunned by the depth of his voice. For the first time, they realized Noah wasn't just strong, he was carrying the weight of 100 battles inside him. The fire crackled loudly, as if acknowledging his confession. A cool breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the treetops. The forest no longer felt like a monster ready to swallow them. For the first time, it felt like a witness to their unity. Adil leaned back and whispered, "So what do we do now?" Noah looked around at each tired face, the survivors who fate had thrown together. "We stay alive," he answered. "Tomorrow, we move again. We look for water, shelter, anything that helps us survive. And no matter what comes, we face it together." A sense of calm settled over the group, and one by one, exhaustion overtook them. Rayyan fell asleep first, head resting on Sana's shoulder. Hyder and Myra leaned against a tree, eyes closing slowly. Adil lay down beside the fire, his body warm for the first time in days. Noah remained awake, staring into the flames, listening to the breaths of the people who were now his family. The night was still dangerous, the forest still unforgiving, but something stronger than fear had taken root within the group, hope. And as the fire glowed brighter, Noah whispered to himself, "We will survive this jungle, no matter what."